of what I stated in my last video and immediately began to research further along. Lots of you have hit my inbox in reference to what I shared about the differences between immigrants and immigrants, for example, and I am very, very pleased with those of you who knows that a 3.5-second Google search is not real research, but would be considered that way by some, only if that individual is limited with expanding their leads and, of course, resource materials. So I'll share more information about it now. The 1828 Webster's English Dictionary states that the noun immigrant, spelled with the letter E, is, quote, one who removes his habitation or quits one country or region to settle in another, while the noun immigrant, spelled with an I, is, quote, a person that removes into a country for the purpose of permanent residence. Now, subscribing to the standard definition of these words makes you conclude that they both mean the same. But most of you who are cognizant of the spells of the English language would know better. Some of you would notice that the definition of immigrate with the letter E would determine that it means exit. And the definition of the word immigrate, spelled with the letter I, would determine that it means to come into, due to both Latin origins of each word. But here's the problem with that. A country is not a continent, and a continent is not a country, state, nor region of a territory. You can recall that in the first video, I shared that the definition of the word immigrant, spelled with the letter E, means people who moves from one region of a country to live in another region of that same country, which derives from its etymology, to remove from one state to another state or territory. This is not hard. Region, be it the states of the country called North America. But isn't North America a continent? Or is it really? But that's for a different time. America is being considered as both by lots of people right now, taking the advice of strangers without managing to actually look it up for themselves. Even the etymology of the word immigrate, spelled with the letter I, informs you that it means to, quote, pass into a place as a new inhabitant or resident. Listen closely. To move to a country where one is not a native for the purposes of settling permanently there. Now, does that sound peaceful to you all or something? It says for the purpose of settling permanently there as a resident and not a native of that landmass. This is why the word remove was used in Webster's definition, because there were wars going on here, and if you become a prisoner, then things get taken away from you. Confiscated. Prisoner of war. You may have heard me mention this multiple times already, but I know some of you newly incoming viewers might not know it yet, and that's fine. This is the reason why I share even more detailed information when I feel as though you may haven't gotten around to researching it just yet. So with all things considered, the driving principles of the ADOS agenda reveals it as, yes, another distraction. A distraction from the actual proof of whether you are an American descendant or an African descendant of slavery, or neither. Slavery did not happen the way we were all told throughout compulsory educational institutions that derived directly from the Reconstruction era of the 1900s. There were political and commercial groups, businesses, and banks who were responsible for granting permission to anthropologists and the power of eugenics to create, cultivate, and influence the reconstructed history they gave to you. The narrative that you are accustomed to now stems from employees of those who wrote the manuscripts you draw from. Slavery used in its proper context is simply labor, servitude. This is why most people would commonly believe today that slavery was abolished in 1865, when it was merely upgraded and transitioned from a bondage standpoint to an industrialized version that runs parallel along the lines of capitalism. In other words, They gave you forced schooling in order to indoctrinate you with whatever it is they want you to know, in order to make you think slavery was one way, when in reality, slavery is still ongoing, the exact same today as if it was in the past. Employment. There were no chains and shackles then, and there are no chains and shackles now, at least not visibly, because some of you failed to realize that the chains and shackles were placed upon your mindsets. What is the Emancipation Proclamation? Many of my viewers will recall it as the time when President Abraham Lincoln freed all of the slaves of North America. Multiple history professors and scholars would agree with you. Even some websites would state that the Emancipation Proclamation, or Proclamation 95, changed the federal legal status of more than 3.5 million enslaved African Americans in the designated areas of the South, from slave to free. However, when you actually read an original copy of Proclamation 95, you will not find any legislation throughout the context of the document where it clearly states that it was created in order to free blacks, coloreds, or African Americans from slavery. Proclamation 95 was a call to end existing public upheavals and riots that were taking place during that time period over a labor dispute. Complaints were arising from the laborers who worked long periods of hours for little to nothing nowadays, or for being promised something for their labor, but the other party didn't hold up to their end of the bargain, gradually transforming the laborers into prisoners of war, realizing that they were being used in order to create and establish the 13 colonies. In fact, the funds which were needed in order to maintain and regulate the 13 colonies were not being generated. So this forced 11 of the southern states to back out of a bad business deal, succeeding themselves from the Union. Then a new union was created, called the Confederate States of America. However, in order to keep the membership of these confederacies, they imposed limitations upon the resigning party's rights, just like any union would today. This was all done through a proclamation to blockade southern states from trading along the waterways. And by doing this, the United States government was able to stop commerce and shipments of products such as rice, corn, grain, and tobacco, just to name a few, from leaving the southern regions of the United States. When I mentioned a bad business deal earlier, this is what I was referring to. And so now you know what the Civil War was truly about. It was a civil dispute amongst employees that were tired of being treated unfairly within their place of employment. It was all about civil rights, inequality in the workplace, fights over improper land grants, tariffs, and trade disputes among settlers and squatters. All gave way to a secession of Confederate states and a broken union. In its simplest form, this was merely a labor dispute.
Whoa, don't skip this ad. What's your hurry? That bumblebee high-five.
Families were preparing to move north. At the Okeechobee labor camp, while families were preparing to move north. At the Okeechobee labor camp, while families were preparing to move north, there was still some work in the bean fields. Children, as usual, were left to fend for themselves.
Jerome, how old are you?
9.
9. Do you go to school?
Yes.
Where do you go to school, Jerome?
I did it over Okeechobee Elementary School.
I see. What is your sister's name?
Lois,
That's Lois. And what are your other sisters' names?
Catherine, and Beulah.
Catherine and Beulah. What happened to your foot, Jerome?
Digging the nail in out there by the wash house.
So you drove a nail in out by the wash house. What did your mother do for that?
With some alcohol on it.
Where do you sleep, Jerome?
In his bed.
You have this big bed?
Yes.
What happened? How did you get that hole in that bed there, Jerome?
The rats.
The what?
Rats.
Now, Jerome, you are taking care of Kathy of Beulah and Lois.
Yes.
Now, are you going to give them lunch today?
Yes.
What are you going to feed them?
Almost.
Do you have any food here to give them?
Yes.
What time does your mother come home?
Almost.
The following day, Arlene King, the mother of Jerome, Kathy, Lois, and Beulah, again was picking beans.
Aileen King, I saw your children yesterday at the Okeechobee camp. Why didn't you put them in the nursery?
I won't make enough to pay for it.
How much does it cost to put them in?
85 cents.
85 cents.
That's right.
Aileen, what time did you come out the field this morning?
6 o'clock.
What time would you get home?
About 3:30, 4 o'clock.
6 this morning to 4 o'clock this afternoon.
That's right.
How much did you earn?
$1.
$1?
That's right. $1.
Is that because the beans were poor quality?
That's right.
Has this happened before?
That's right.
How much will your food cost you today?
About 2 hours.
Aileen, how old are you?
29.
How many children do you have?
14.
How old were you when you first started working in the fields?
8.
You've been working 21 years in the fields?
That's right.
Aileen, do you ever think you'll be able to get out of this kind of work?
No.
The Civil War was a labor dispute that was inevitably tied to American Indian lands. And for this reason, a scheme was devised where the people on the bottom will be able to create a flip-flop that resulted in their eventual rise to the top. More about this in my documentary series called African Americans Are a Big Threat to American Society. But I stated that to say this: our people were always home, even when the Industrial Revolution began. Our ancestors were the ones prospering. We owned the lands, lakes, rivers, businesses, and the banks. And most importantly, we were well aware of how and where to get the resources needed to sustain the continued growth of our success and the success of Turtle Island, aka North America. So, how does an immigrant remove an indigenous person and replace themselves as a permanent resident?
Do you realize that there was an agreement made between our people, before people without color here? The black people agreed that they could sacrifice and do the slavery thing for us, or we were completely wiped out. We owe them such a debt. Don't be caught up in American racism. They don't want us to unite and be together because they're afraid of that we'll treat them the way they treated us. We're human beings. We could never be that thoughtless, and we don't have to worry about that because from the way things look, they're going to self-destruct. A lot of them are spinning out of control. We're not even going to have to do anything. We might have to put a few of them out of their misery, but...
According to a well-known anthropologist by the name of Margaret Mead, you don't come into a place with an attitude of entitlement, because people generally enjoy when you learn their language and their culture. As long as you come into a place ready to learn and join their society, it's okay. It's very flattering for all people when someone wants to be taught. And also, Margaret Mead stated, quote, "You have to do something pretty terrible to people before they come to regard you as a spy, rather than an interested explorer." And that is exactly what they did when they adopted our ancestors' constitutions and created confederacies that reflected our ancestors' form of government. The Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union was a set of laws which was used to form the first U.S. government in the year 1777. This was based on the information learned by the foreigners and through Indian relations. Each Indian tribe had its own confederacy and its own constitution, and they had a commander, which was the chief. This form of government allowed for the individual sovereignty of each tribe to take place and not to be imposed upon. It also allowed for trade relations outside of the tribe to take place, amongst those who are the heads or chiefs of the tribe or clan. And this is the idea that the 13 colonies took for themselves. They created the Articles of Confederation, not as colonies, but as confederacies. There was a confederacy for each state, and this is why there is also a constitution for each state. This is also why when they separated from the Union that they called themselves the Confederate States of America. The colonies of the United States created a confederacy and a union which had the duty to, quote, enter into a firm league of friendship with each other for their common defense, the security of their liberties, and their mutual and general welfare, binding themselves to assist each other against all force offered to or attacks made upon them or any of them on account of religion, sovereignty, trade, or any other pretense whatsoever. And they used a formal setting known as Congress to resolve their disputes. Congress is defined as a formal assembly of 2 or more representatives, ambassadors, or nations that comes together to discuss problems. Sound familiar? The House of Representatives, Congress, a commander-in-chief. And because these foreign confederacies were so few in numbers alongside the large amount of Indian confederacies, they decided to form a union, which is short for trade union or labor union, that ensures they would always be together for a common purpose. In most cases, the American Indian clans or tribes allegedly agreed to sign treaties with foreigners, or rather a foreign government, to ensure peaceful cooperation between themselves, dating back to the latter part of the 1770s. This is also around the time when our own people were pitted against each other for the purposes of disloyalty and betrayal, and the colonization of our people through paper genocide. Of course, this was all politics. So, the start of the Civil War was the very first government shutdown, because it was declared a state of emergency, whereas the commander-in-chief takes supreme authority and decides what could possibly settle the dispute and get everyone working together again. All of this leads back to the Emancipation Proclamation, and according to the original documents, which is listed in an exhibit for the National Archives, it reads that on the first day of January, in the year of our Lord 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then, thenceforward and forever free. It also states that, and I hereby enjoin upon the people so declared to be free to abstain from all violence unless in necessary self-defense, and I recommend to them that in all cases when allowed, they labor faithfully for reasonable wages. Which truly lets you know that slavery, as we were all taught in school, is royally incorrect. Because you can't let a slave know what slavery was all about. Then that person will realize that he or she may still be a slave now. I'm just here to make you